I've always thought there's a kind of electricity in the smallest of pauses. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind, but the one that hums faintly, unnoticed by anyone else, the kind that lingers on your skin and refuses to let go. That's what I felt the first time I saw her at the repair shop, standing behind the counter with her arms crossed, tilting her head slightly, as if she were weighing every word I said before deciding whether it was worth her attention. Her name was Marianne. I didn't know her then, of course. I only knew that something in the way she moved, calm, deliberate, almost careless with herself but exacting with the world, made me hyper-aware of everything I did. I kept my hands tucked in my pockets, like they were dangerous, like they could ruin whatever fragile equilibrium existed in that quiet corner of the shop. I'd come in to drop off my old bike, half expecting a guy my age, messy hair, grease-stained hoodie, to help me. Instead, she leaned over the counter, her short auburn hair brushing the nape of her neck, and smiled just enough that I felt like I'd been let in on a secret. Not a flirtatious smile. Not an "I want you" smile. Something else. Something heavier. "Did you want it fixed today or tomorrow?" Her voice was calm but edged with subtle humor, as if she knew I was nervous and found it both amusing and a little sad. I tried to answer casually, but my voice wobbled. She noticed, I'm sure. Her eyes flicked to mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and my chest thumped like I'd been running. The shop smelled of motor oil and old leather, but I didn't notice. I noticed the faint trace of her perfume, something green, earthy, soft, and how it clung to her sleeve when she handed me the clipboard. Our fingers brushed. A fraction of a second, maybe a blink, and yet it set something loose in me I couldn't name. She asked a question about the chain, and I answered, fumbling over technical terms I didn't even fully understand. She nodded, not impatiently, but like she was listening with the kind of attention you give someone you're deciding whether they're worth noticing. And in that moment, in the way her lips pressed into a line when I said something wrong, I realized I wanted her approval more than I wanted the bike fixed. Then she laughed, soft, low, like a vibration under the surface, and I swear I felt the air shift around us. It wasn't a shared joke. Nothing about the situation was funny. But somehow, in that small act, she had made a space in the day that existed just for me, a private little bubble I didn't want to leave. I left the shop that afternoon with the usual receipt in my pocket and something else tucked under my ribs. A warmth, a tension, a question that wouldn't stop circling in my head. Every time I tried to replay the day rationally, I caught myself looking for the small movements. The brush of her fingers, the tilt of her head, the way she held my gaze just long enough to make me feel unsteady. And then I realized, I didn't just like her. I didn't just want to know her. I was already thinking about her when she wasn't there. Already imagining the next pause, the next glance. Already remembering the way she had made me feel like I was both invisible and completely seen at the same time. I couldn't stop thinking about her. I didn't plan on seeing her again so soon. The next morning, the shop was quieter than usual. The hum of the fluorescent lights above was almost hypnotic. She was at the back, kneeling beside a bike frame, her hair tied back loosely, strands falling over her face as she worked. There was a weight in her shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday, or maybe I'd just never noticed it. "Hey," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes seemed to measure me, decide if I was allowed to exist in her space. Then she gave a small nod. "You're early," she said, voice even but distant, the faintest shadow of exhaustion lurking in the corners. I knelt beside her, offering to help with the chain adjustment. She hesitated, glancing at my hands as though deciding whether to trust me with the delicate work. And when she finally stepped back, she didn't smile. She didn't invite conversation. She simply let me move closer, letting the space between us shrink without acknowledging it. Her hands were remarkable, long fingers, strong but elegant, calloused in some places from work, soft in others. I caught myself staring, memorizing the way she adjusted the wrench, the slight tremor in her wrist when she tightened a bolt too quickly. It was absurd how much it mattered to me, how each micro-movement seemed to speak volumes. "You don't have to," she started, and then paused, letting the words hang unfinished in the air. Her lips pressed together, and she glanced down at the floor, and I realized she was uncomfortable, not with me, but with whatever she had almost said. I didn't push. I just watched, silently, giving her space and somehow feeling more connected in that quiet observation than I ever had in conversation. Then she laughed softly at something I said. A joke. Maybe, though it sounded more like relief than amusement. The laugh was short, careful, but it vibrated somewhere under my skin. It made her seem human in a way that yesterday's polished composure hadn't. And I noticed how tired she looked, the subtle shadows under her eyes, the slight slump in her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. I wanted to reach out, to brush a strand of hair from her face, to offer a word of comfort I didn't have, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned over the frame, pretending to adjust the gears, and let my shoulder brush hers ever so lightly. A tiny collision of warmth and proximity, yet it made both of us shift, hesitate. She froze for a heartbeat. Then she let out a soft sigh, almost inaudible, and went back to her work without looking at me. But her hand lingered on the bike a moment longer than necessary, and I felt it. That quiet, charged pause where nothing is said but everything is communicated. I left that morning thinking about her hands, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the tool room, the way she had laughed and then quickly tucked it away. I couldn't stop replaying the moment when our shoulders touched, the small, electric acknowledgement of each other's presence. And I realized, with a mixture of dread and longing, that I was already tethered to her in a way that made every future interaction feel both inevitable and dangerous. It was late when I returned to the shop. Rain hammered against the windows, and the fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting long, jittering shadows across the floor. She was still there, bent over a frame on the workbench, sleeves rolled up, a faint sheen of sweat on her forehead. I'd thought about her all day, the way her laugh had trembled yesterday, the curve of her smile I couldn't stop replaying. And now, seeing her like this, tired and focused, my chest tightened. Still at it? I asked quietly, stepping closer, careful not to startle her. She straightened, blinking at me like I'd interrupted a private ritual. Yeah, she said, voice low, almost tired. Deadline. Her gaze flicked to the rain outside, and for a moment, I caught something in her expression that I couldn't name. Vulnerability, maybe, or regret. I moved to help, silently, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her side as we both reached for the same wrench. Our hands brushed, not by accident this time, but intentionally, almost seeking contact, and I froze, aware of how much I wanted to linger. Careful, she murmured, lips barely moving. There was a catch in her tone, an unspoken warning. I wanted to tell her something, anything, but words faltered on my tongue. Instead, I just let my hand hover near hers, willing her to notice without crossing a line. The silence stretched, charged. Outside, thunder rolled, and the storm seemed to mirror the sudden pull between us. I wanted to speak, to confess that I couldn't stop thinking about her, that every glance, every touch, made me ache, but my voice stuck. I wasn't sure I had the right to disturb her world. Then her phone rang, sharp against the hum of the shop. She glanced at it, hesitated, and finally pressed a finger against the screen. I caught a glimpse of a name, someone from her past, someone I couldn't compete with. Her shoulders stiffened, and she answered with practiced civility, masking whatever flicker of irritation or longing had appeared. I stepped back slightly, letting her reclaim the space, but my heart sank anyway. I wanted to say something, anything, to reclaim the intimacy of the moment, but instead, I stood in quiet frustration, biting the inside of my cheek. I noticed the slight quiver in her hands, the way her lips pressed together as she spoke, and I realized she was holding herself together with effort, just like I was trying to hold back my own urge to step closer. The call ended. She put the phone down slowly, as if setting aside a weight she hadn't meant to carry in front of me. I wanted to reach out, brush her hair from her forehead, ask if she needed to talk, but instead, I just leaned in slightly, close enough to feel her breath against my cheek. Her eyes flicked up to mine for the briefest moment, sharp, electric, full of words she didn't say, and I felt the pull, unbearable and exquisite. I wanted to tell her something then, anything, but the world intervened again, a roll of thunder, a bolt of lightning illuminating the workshop, the quiet insistence of propriety and distance. I pulled back slightly, pretending to check a tool, but my chest ached from the near contact. The air between us vibrated with unspoken confessions, a tension neither of us could resolve that night. And as I left, the storm still raging outside, I realized how painfully close we had come, how nearly I had crossed the line that neither of us were ready to acknowledge. The shop was empty, the smell of oil and rain mingling in the still air. Evening had come, but the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh against the shadows gathering in the corners. She was sitting on the edge of a workbench, legs crossed, hands folded loosely in her lap, and I realized I hadn't spoken since I arrived. I didn't want to break the tension, though. Some silences need to stretch, need to breathe, before they can become anything else. "Do you ever wonder?" she started, her voice low, hesitant, trailing off like the words were too heavy to finish. I didn't answer, just tilted my head toward her, urging her to continue without saying a thing. "What are we doing?" she finally whispered, eyes fixed somewhere on the far wall, avoiding mine. Not in shame, not in fear, but in quiet confusion, as if she were talking more to herself than to me. Her question hit me in a way that no touch ever could. I wanted to answer, to offer some kind of clarity, but the truth was, I didn't know. I felt my chest tighten, heart hammering against the invisible wall of propriety and reason. Everything between us was real, charged, impossible to ignore, yet there was no name for it, no map, no rulebook. I stepped closer, careful, measuring every movement, and she didn't flinch. Not yet. Not until I lowered my gaze to her hands. Hands that had been strong, precise, sure, and now trembled just slightly as they rested on her knees. I don't know," I admitted, voice barely audible, almost swallowed by the quiet hum of the shop. My fingers itched to reach for her, to steady those hands, to say something that would make the ache inside stop, but I stopped myself. The words didn't need embellishment. The pause, the admission, was enough. She laughed, softly, a short, bitter sound, almost a sigh. "Of course you don't," she murmured, but there was no malice in it, only recognition. Recognition that the space between us was more than physical. It was emotional, moral, complicated, and terrifying. We sat there, the rain tapping against the windows, letting the silence stretch again, longer this time. No joke, no attempt at casual conversation, no distractions. Just the weight of what had been simmering between us for days. A truth too large for words, yet too urgent to ignore. Her eyes finally met mine, and I saw everything. Hesitation, longing, fear, the faint trace of hope. But mostly, I saw that she was trying to hold herself together. And I knew I wasn't going to be the one to let her. "What happens if we just keep going like this?" she asked finally, and it wasn't a question about romance. It wasn't about desire. It was existential, about boundaries, about who we were, about the rules we had silently agreed not to break. I swallowed, the lump in my throat nearly choking me. "I don't think we can," I whispered. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, to explain, to laugh it off. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered one line that made the air in the shop feel suddenly fragile, like it could shatter with a touch. "Then why does it feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life?" And just like that, the quiet between us broke, not with touch, not with words, but with a vulnerability that neither of us knew how to handle. I showed up at the shop later that evening, just after the golden light outside had faded into the gray of early night. She was sitting on a stool behind the counter, flipping through a small stack of papers, the edges frayed and curling. I noticed immediately that her shoulders were tense, her hands restless, tapping lightly against a page like she was trying to contain something inside. "Hey," I said, voice soft, unsure if I was allowed in. She looked up, eyes tired but alert, and for a moment, she didn't answer. Then, without preamble, she said, "I lost someone once. A long time ago. I thought I'd gotten over it, but..." Her voice faltered, trailing off as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't meet my eyes, and yet, somehow, I felt like she was letting me in anyway. I didn't say anything immediately. Instead, I leaned against the counter, careful not to crowd her, and let her words settle around us. The hum of the fluorescent lights, The quiet tick of the clock, the faint smell of motor oil and paper, it all seemed to amplify the weight of her confession. I never told anyone, she continued, finally glancing at me. Not even the people who cared about me. It's embarrassing, I guess, how much I carried it alone. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the papers, and I noticed the small details. The way her ring caught the light, the tiny scratch on her wrist from some unnoticed accident, the faint crease between her brows where worry had settled permanently. I wanted to reach out, to brush her hair from her face, to tell her it was okay. But I didn't. I just stayed, silent, letting her vulnerability breathe in the space between us. Then she pulled one of the papers from the stack, a faded photograph, and held it out to me. A man, smiling faintly, holding her younger self close. "This is him," she said, voice soft, almost breaking. "I lost him. And sometimes I feel like I lost the chance to be fully happy after that. Like I'm still waiting for something that will never come." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, that maybe she could still find something like that again, even if it wasn't the same. But all I could do was take the photo, study the man she'd loved and lost, and feel the tremor of her past brush against my chest. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of unspoken words pressing down, heavier than any touch could have been. Finally, she looked up at me, eyes glistening, and said something that made my stomach flip. "I don't know if I'm ready for someone new, but somehow, being here with you feels like stepping off the edge and hoping I'll land somewhere safe." I didn't move, didn't speak. I just let her words sink in, the quiet seismic shift reverberating through me. And for the first time, I realized that this connection, fragile and forbidden as it was, had the power to change both of us, if we dared to let it. And then she smiled, just a fraction, the kind of smile that both reassured and terrified me at the same time. The shop smelled faintly of oil and rain, but today it also smelled like coffee, 2 mugs sitting forgotten on the counter. She was leaning against the edge, sleeves rolled up, the faintest smudge of grease on her cheek, eyes tracing the floor as if it held answers she couldn't find anywhere else. I stepped closer, careful, but I didn't break the quiet. We didn't need words yet. "You know," she said finally, voice low, "I keep thinking I shouldn't feel this." She didn't look at me, but I could feel the tremor in her words, the hesitation, the weight of every unspoken thought. I leaned against the workbench near her, hands tucked in my pockets. "I feel it too," I admitted softly, almost a whisper. No declarations, no grand gestures, just honesty, even if we shouldn't. She finally met my eyes, and there it was, recognition, relief, a small spark that made my chest tighten. Not romance, not fireworks, just a quiet acknowledgement that we had crossed some invisible line and, somehow, both of us had wanted to. We moved closer, almost imperceptibly. Our shoulders brushed while we worked on a bike together, hands occasionally grazing each other as we passed tools. Each touch was careful, deliberate, weighted with all the tension we'd carried these past weeks. No rushing, no claiming, just shared space, mutual understanding. At one point, she paused, looking at me in that way that made my stomach flip. Then she leaned her forehead briefly against mine, eyes closing for a heartbeat, just long enough to feel the warmth, just long enough to know that neither of us would pretend this wasn't real. I didn't move, didn't pull away. I just let her. We returned to our work, silent now, but the air had shifted. It wasn't awkward anymore. It wasn't forbidden. It was quiet acceptance. Every glance, every subtle movement carried the weight of what we both knew, but without needing to name it. At the end, we sat on the low bench by the window, the rain slowing to a drizzle outside. Our knees brushed lightly, and I noticed the faint curve of her smile, the way her fingers twitched when she thought no one was looking. I placed my hand next to hers, letting our fingers hover, almost touch, almost acknowledge, but not forcing the moment. She didn't move hers, didn't pull away. We just sat, side by side, in the dim light, letting everything that had built between us settle quietly. Not resolved with words, not romanticized with declarations, just real, just earned. And in that shared silence, I realized something profound. Love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, It arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the brushing of hands, the shared work, the decision to stay present. No words, no grand gesture, just us, sitting there, letting the world continue around us, finally understanding that what had been impossible before had become inevitable. And that was enough. Looking back now, months later, I can still remember that quiet hum of the shop, the smell of rain on asphalt, and the faint trace of her perfume lingering on my hands. It's strange how some moments stick, not because they're loud or dramatic, but because they quietly change you, alter the way you see the world and yourself. I think about her often, not with the desperation I once felt, but with a soft gratitude. She taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. That love doesn't always have to announce itself, that it can live in the small spaces between people, the shared silences, the brief glances, the gentle acknowledgement that someone truly sees you. She changed too, I think. Watching her carry herself with that mix of strength and vulnerability, letting herself trust, letting herself be human around me. It was beautiful to witness. We didn't need to force it, didn't need grand declarations. The quiet understanding, the small gestures, the moments of presence, that was enough. And somehow, those things became the foundation of something real. I still notice the small details, the way her hands move when she's focused, the faint crease on her forehead when she's thinking, the almost imperceptible sighs when she's content. I catch myself smiling at the memory of them, remembering the way our shoulders brushed, the soft forehead lean, the times our fingers almost touched but didn't have to. It's a love built not on fireworks, but on countless tiny sparks, quietly stitched together over weeks, months, moments. I've learned that love doesn't need perfection. It needs patience, attention, courage to stay present even when you're unsure. And maybe, most importantly, it's about letting someone in, not all at once, not in grand gestures, but slowly, so that when you finally reach each other, it feels inevitable rather than rushed. We're still learning, still navigating, still discovering the edges of what this connection can be. But there's a peace in that, a quiet afterglow that settles somewhere in the chest and doesn't leave. That sense of being seen, being accepted, being allowed to exist fully without pretension. It's subtle, but it changes everything. And sometimes, when I pause in the shop or hear the rain tapping against the windows, I think about her and I feel that old, electric pull all over again. Not frantic, not desperate, just warm and persistent, a reminder of everything we found in each other. If this story made you feel something, even just a small spark, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this? Because sometimes, the quietest stories leave the deepest marks.